You know your Formula One team is in dire straits when you've got someone like Eddie Jordan on your case calling you an embarrassment. And I would be careful with Eddie, because he knows how to use one of these. Sorry, maybe one of these, rugby reference. Usually these pundits tend to get a little bit over the top with these scathing remarks. However, in this case, I feel like Eddie Jordan has a point, and it all comes down to the dismissal of Otmar Szafnauer. Sure, he wasn't the most flamboyant individual out there, save for a very flamboyant name, but when it came down to the brass tacks of running a Formula One team, having that guy as your team principal, that's a solid shout, because he somewhat knew what he was talking about, and he had plenty of good kudos from the likes of Force India and Racing Point, providing many results that many people wouldn't have expected, and allowed the likes of Sergio Perez to get a number of podiums and nobody expecting it, and him being dubbed the Tyre Whisperer. I reckon that Eddie Jordan has a lot of positive feedback from the likes of Otmar. I'm pretty sure that he was happy that what was once his team was then continuing to do well and had recovered from the days of 2003 and 2004 when Jordan were pretty much near the back, and that their best result since Giancarlo Fisichella's win in Brazil was Thiago Monteiro and Indy 2005. Hey, I'm not diminishing Monteiro's podium. He was really happy that day. In fact, he was the only happy person that day. So understandably, when he hears about his dear old friend and person he wishes well being removed from the likes of Alpine for seemingly no reason, he would be absolutely apoplectic, and any opportunity to scorn the likes of Alpine would be taken merrily. And that is the case today, as he has basically viewed Alpine as a total embarrassment. And an embarrassment for Formula One itself, doing their drivers a disservice. And that kind of makes me think, perhaps that video I put out a few months ago about the rumours that Gasly and Ocon wanted out had legs after all. And then, with the Peugeot contingent being brought in, led by Bruno Famin, who has now become a more permanent figurehead of the team has continued to either show its failings or shed more and more personnel, with the likes of Bob Bell going off to Aston Martin to partner up with Alonso again. Sure, at this point Bob Bell wasn't active directly in Alpine's daily activities, but he did have a minor role in some capacity, and Alonso is happy to see his old friend again. And then when you get the technical director and head of Aero resigning at the same time, apparently they tendered their resignations before the Bahrain Grand Prix, so they already knew it was going to be bad. You then get a Bahrain Grand Prix, which arguably was even worse than McLaren's last year. We've basically seen the impossible happen, and the Enstone team now is looking likely to have one of its worst seasons since back when they were known as Toleman in 1983, when they were 9th place in the Constructors. What's even more galling for them is that Haas now look more clued up than Alpine do. Haas! How does it even happen? Well, if there was one thing that Gunther Steiner was really good at, was trying to boost morale where there practically wasn't any. He managed to keep the troops alive and keep them going, and even though the results weren't speaking for themselves, they still rated him as a really good team principal. And it's actually quite shocking that he realised now that maybe he should have left the team a lot more sooner than he actually did. But either way, Haas right now, under the guise of Komatsu, they have managed to find themselves a little bit more resourceful, recognizing what their failures are, and then finding a way to patch the problems, which in a way looks more optimistic, and a little bit more like a sort of mini Williams renaissance like James Vowles had last year, not to as much of a degree. But at least with Haas there's some hope now, whereas Alpine, it's really cloudy at the moment. There doesn't seem to be any sense of unity and only a stack of marching orders, as it almost seems like every race weekend comes with a key member of the team's staff either resigning or being sacked for the poor performance on display. It just makes Szafnauer's sacking all the more baffling, and the comments that he made that he basically managed to make an error department where before he arrived there wasn't one, all the more puzzling. Like, why did they get rid of the guy who was putting things together? Did they just lose patience? Yeah, they probably lost patience, actually. And again, Eddie Jordan's comments make all the more sense. Now with that head of Aero gone, you feel like all the work that Otmar did was being undone. And in a way, I kind of feel like it was almost deliberate, like they just wanted to completely remove everything that Szafnauer did and start afresh with their own model that worked with Peugeot. But now it's not working in Formula One. It's shocking, that, isn't it? You get the feeling now Alpine is losing its identity, despite more of its senior management staff being French. That's the weird thing. But it all comes down to something I notice in the British tabloids. At the moment, they're not always being referred to as Alpine or the Alpine F1 team. They are now, thanks to their blockbuster investors, being referred to as Ryan Reynolds Formula One team in such and such and such and such. Most likely something to do with administrative trouble. And that's a really bad sign because granted, you get this major investment, but if you've got celebrities tied to it, then these celebrities, amongst the normal populace, are more recognizable than, say, for example, Alpine, because people go, Alpine? What the heck is that? And then you just go, oh, Ryan Reynolds' team. Oh, wow, he has a team? Wow. It's a Ryan Reynolds, Deadpool, yeah! It's like Ryan Reynolds' toy project or something. You bet in the next Deadpool movie, there is going to be either a cameo from Esteban Ocon or some kind of acknowledgement of their team and recognizing, yeah, my investment didn't go down well, did it? Like, something like that. There'll be some kind of little jibe. I mean, sure, it's not exactly inaccurate, but it's really not a good look for Alpine or the Renault group that your brand is being diminished by somebody else. And Renault are a very proud organization. It's making me think more and more about the news coming out from a couple of months ago that supposedly the investors that got into bed with Alpine had courted Haas prior to them and were unceremoniously sent away by Gene Haas. Him making it pretty clear that he didn't want to share in the glory of running the team or having to answer to investors, basically just wanting to run the show himself, having no oversight and just doing what he wants, which is mostly at the moment just running Haas as a billboard team. Thankfully, though, with Komatsu, they are being resourceful somewhat and making do and mending. I can now see a bit why Gene Haas rejected this outside investment. Sure, it's going against the grain about what all the other teams are doing, but right now, it's making more logical sense. And also, Maximum Effort were determined that their purpose with Alpine was to give them the money that they need to buy the resources and upgrade the facilities as much as possible, which is all well and good. But if you don't have the personnel to make the most of that fund and get the best facilities and know how to use them, that guy Steve over there, he doesn't know how to use it, he only knows how to make the tea. I don't think I've seen the Enston team this down on its luck since it declared bankruptcy in the wake of that stupid clause in Kimi Raikkonen's contract for 2013 where he would get a bonus every time he scored a point, and then he scored about 150 of them. Okay, what are they going to do about it? How are the management going to try and turn this around and get Alpine back to at least where they were in no man's land in 2023, in 6th place? At least get them to the point where they can be duking it out with Aston Martin on a regular basis, because right now, they are nowhere near where they used to be with McLaren. That rivalry's gone. Now that ship has sailed. McLaren's back to duking it out with Ferrari at this point, or at least eventually this year. From my point of view, it's looking increasingly obvious that they are looking to the model that McLaren implemented at the end of 2022 and worked so well throughout 2023. Basically, they're just taking a look at McLaren's surge to the top and thinking, well, they could do it, then so can we. We'll just do exactly what McLaren did and see what happens. But what do I mean by that? Well, it sort of started out in a similar way with Esteban Ocon's comments saying that in the simulator, they found some fundamental issues with the A524 around about the December time, which is around about the same time that McLaren discovered some fundamental flaws with their development for the 2023 car in the wake of the 2022 car, figuring out that that concept didn't work and they had to completely change tack. So that's almost happened at roughly the same time, that during the Christmas period, they found a fundamental issue that they've now had to frantically fix, which means that development for the 2024 car was hindered, and thusly, we've got a car which is incredibly slow and is very much overweight, about 11 kilos, I think. And that they want an upgrade path in a similar manner to McLaren, that they will be bringing upgrades almost to every single race or every other race. Then there is the plan of what they are doing after their technical director, Harman, departed, that instead of going for just simply another director, what they're doing now is lending more credence to then copying McLaren's hymn book and how well it worked in 2023, in that instead of just going for another technical director, they're going for the three-prong model, in having 3 different technical directors, one in charge of car concept, one in charge of aero, and one in terms of engineering. Now, that's all very well and good. You're spreading the workload, so that means one technical director isn't trying to do the work of every single facet of the car. It can be spread out, so that means many people can delegate. But this works only when you've got the right kind of person in charge of it. Why I think this might not work is because the names that I've heard from Alpine are names I'm not really familiar with. It could absolutely work. I mean, I think the closest one is Kyron Pilbeam, who used to be Webber's race engineer. That could work in his own department. But the rest of them, it's a little bit up in the air. It might work fantastically, and this might be the thing that they need. But with Ocon's comments in the simulator, they've said that this is going to be something that takes some time. It's going to be a long game. This isn't going to be an immediate fix. I mean, it could easily change and become what McLaren had at Silverstone last year, but right now, we don't know. But with McLaren's model, who they have in charge of the individual departments are really impressive names. You've got Rob Marshall coming in from Red Bull in terms of engineering, being the technical director on that front. You've got David Sanchez coming back to McLaren from Ferrari in terms of car concept. And then you've got the stalwart of McLaren, Peter Prodromou, in terms of aerodynamics, who's worked at McLaren for an incredibly long time. Two of those names alone know McLaren inside and out. And then when you've got them reporting to Andrea Stella, the team principal, and then you've got Zach Brown, the CEO, you feel like that community that McLaren have is tight-knit. And that's partially why it works. Not to mention for the fact that McLaren, they have a lot of money behind them, especially for the fact that I think the Kingdom of Bahrain practically owns them now. Whether or not that's a savoury owner, they have plenty of money to throw at it, whereas Alpine don't. Renault only have so much cash, and the extra investment from maximum effort only can take them so far, but it's not an endless, bottomless pit. And it remains to be seen whether this model they are aping from McLaren will go the distance, but at least they're doing something. But then again, it might not work, because when McLaren implemented this three-prong approach, this matrix concept, under Ron Dennis in 2010 and the 2010s itself, it did fall apart, and eventually they reverted back to the singular technical director model. It all depends on who's in charge. If somebody in charge does well, then it's great. If not, and things just completely fall to bits, or if you've got three heads that try and outdo one another, there's secrecy, they don't talk to one another, there's lack of communication, then it can easily just disintegrate, where one department is overriding one other department, and then you get complete mismatch, and then the car is a complete and utter dog. Then there, of course, there's the brain drain that Alpine's had. So much in less than 12 months. No, sorry, brain drain, that's an understatement. It's more like a brain evacuation. I almost said something else then. I've never seen such a brain drain in less than a year. Since Otmar Szafnauer went, and even before then, so many key senior members of staff that had worked with the Enston lot for decades just suddenly up sticks and left, or were unceremoniously dropped. It's ridiculous. This kind of change I don't think was necessarily a good one. Even the Ferrari brain drain post-Michael Schumacher was a gradual affair that took place over a period of a few years, and most of them heading off to retirement. Most of them just kind of finishing off what they had done and then going off quietly into the night, instead of just simply to another team, which is kind of what is happening with the likes of the Alpine lot. And then we got to talk about Fernando Alonso. This guy knows how to turn the screw without looking like he is even turning the screw. Okay, what do I mean by that? It's all got to do with these comments that he made, that he was wishing the team well, and that in a way he didn't like seeing where they were at the moment, that he hoped for the best. But even then, these comments are tinged with a little bit of a, I don't like the way you run your team at the moment. Because despite wishing the team well and hoping they can make things better, the comments are laced with jibes towards the current management, implying that work under Otmar was something he rated, commenting that they were regularly hunting for solid points, and that the only things that really got him down in his time with Alpine for the third time was a lack of professionalism regarding his contract. Which, to be fair, Otmar had little to do with, because the majority of the kerfuffle happened while he was not at Alpine. He only came in halfway. And then not to mention the unreliability of the car, which dogged him throughout 2022, as well as all of the tussles that he had with Esteban Ocon, many of them completely unnecessary. Not to mention Papa Stroll came along and gave Fernando Alonso an offer he couldn't refuse, as well as a car he couldn't refuse, which turned out to be true. Very true. What also lends to my theory is that Alonso said that the team was different when he was there, implying that he believes the current lineup isn't the same, and that the changes made since Otmar's ousting might not be as good as they were when he was there. And one thing that's very, very clear that lends to my theory that he's having a go at the management is that Alonso's not having a dig at the crew themselves. The trackside crew that he worked with, many of them still working when he was at Renault the first time around, he rates incredibly well. He hopes that they can have some success, and that what's going on right now is something that they don't deserve. But when it comes to the top management, that's when they have issues, and that's why they leave. And then it doesn't help whenever you see Alonso and Piastri together, they give a knowing look. But wait, Eddie Jordan has yet another point I agree with. What? In that the Alpine and Renault team are looking for an exit, and that they are wide open for a sale. Wow, Eddie Jordan is really perceptive, and I think he knows what he's talking about, because he was in a similar boat in the mid-2000s when he sold up the Jordan team for a cool £34 million. And thanks to that, as well as his many other ventures, I didn't know this, but oh my god! This guy, Eddie Jordan, is richer than Cristiano Ronaldo and Roger Federer. He's richer than Lewis Hamilton! How did the guy who is most famous for knowing how to play the spoons end up richer than the 7-time world champion? Well, in a similar way to what happened with Eddie Irvine and why he's incredibly rich. You know, property, venture capitalism, gaming, lifestyle, everything else really under the sun. Not just racing. And that means the job he's doing with Channel 4 and all the other punditry stuff, he's just doing for a laugh. The podcast he's doing with DC, it's probably for a laugh. Because he's got nearly £500 million. Wow. But regardless, Eddie Jordan came to a conclusion that his time in Formula 1 was at an end and that he was looking to sell the team, which he did to the Midland Group, which then became Spiker, and then became Force India when Vijay Mallya bought it, and that ran for a good old decade before Papa Stroll came in, and now currently Papa Stroll runs it as Aston Martin. So that team has endured since 1991, which Eddie Jordan started off with, and was fairly competent for a very long time. What I'm trying to get at is that Eddie Jordan knows when it is the right time to sell a team. When the jig is up, there's no point continuing. And also, Renault has previous in dropping everything in terms of owning a Formula 1 team, and either just completely removing themselves from the sports entirely, or just staying on as an engine manufacturer. Because most recently, back in 2010, they sold 75% of their stake in the Enston team to an outside party, and then the following year, they got rid of the rest of it, only buying back in 2016. So, I could easily see the same thing happening again, since they sold off nearly a quarter of that team to Maximum Effort and all of those random celebrities, including Anthony Joshua and Rory McIlroy. You just feel like maybe that process is starting right now, that Renault is slowly stepping back for Formula 1, because them changing themselves from Renault to Alpine to promote their sports car division, which only still has one car, even though they promise more, I feel like Renault is maybe moving away and perhaps maybe looking for a buyer. They are taking some of the responsibility away of running the team by giving it to these outside investors who are pumping in more and more cash, but they've also got to be careful, because if this is not going to provide extra results, then these investors could easily walk away, and then Renault would be really up a paddle with no creek. So, okay, who could they possibly sell it to? Well, okay, I'll just get out of the way. They could maybe sell it to Andretti, perhaps, if they wanted to, but it would still be quite expensive. And they're also building their own facilities in America, and they've got that satellite base in Silverstone, so would they really want to take on the aging Enston facility when they're already building stuff which is ultra-modern, or at least ultra-relevant, being in the Silverstone area? That remains to be seen. But quite clearly, Alpine's not looking all that hot at the moment. And had they kept Otmar Szafnauer, would have all of this been lessened and things might not have been as bad? Well, it's hard to say. But at least things might have been a little bit more stable than they are now, with almost every single race weekend ending up with somebody from Alpine either retiring or resigning or getting fired. But one thing is for sure, if you're getting somebody like Eddie Jordan spitting facts about their lot, as well as Haas looking incredibly competent and changing their direction in the space of a few months, then you know that Alpine is in trouble. That whatever is going down in that team is not ideal for them or for the sport itself. Especially since Formula 1 is dealing with a lot of controversy from different teams, unspectacular results with Max Verstappen completely wiping the floor with everybody. Yes, that achievement is very good and all, but in terms of predictability, it's quite up there. And again, the Enston team heading towards its worst season since 1983. That is not a good look. But okay, what about Haas? Why am I so much more optimistic about them in the space of a few months, when just a few months ago I was saying that Haas were heading towards a hiding to nowhere and that they would be last guaranteed? Well, go and watch this video next and I'll tell you exactly why I think there is hope for Haas, and why their antics in Jeddah will set the tone for the bottom 5 teams and how desperate they will be trying to score a point.